Hey guys, this is Cross for Double Cross Games, and today we are going to be making an AI that patrols back and forth. For those of you who have been following along with our simple AI, in the last video we made some modifications to our NPC base here that will allow him to have two idols set by an enum that we can select back and forth. And those of you who are coming straight into this, the setup for our NPC base is actually in the simple AI videos, but the behavior itself and the asset we're going to make will work on their own. So let's go ahead and get started. Just right click and go to Blueprint Class, select an actor, because this is going to be our patrol path. You're going to double click our patrol path, and we're going to add a component. It's going to be a spline. And we'll call our spline path, just for simplicity. Next thing we need to do is we'll go into the construction script, and in the construction script we're going to drag our path into the graph, and we're going to get number of spline points. That's going to give us the total number of spline points, which by default is 2. But we don't want the number of spline points. What we actually want is the last index for the last spline point. So that's going to be -1. Since the spline creates its points on a zero-based system, because they're indexes, 2 spline points, the last spline point would be 1. It's always 1 less than the total number. So that's why we minus it by 1. And we right click on the graph and type for loop, so we can get our for loop. And we're going to put our last index right there. In our loop body, what we're going to do is we're going to add a box collision to each point on the spline. So we will add box. There it is, at box collision. And it's asking me for a relative transform, which makes sense. So we'll drag our path in one more time, because we want these box collisions to populate on top of each of the spline points, so we can get an overlap. So we'll drag out of that and get location at spline point. And that gives me a vector location in local space, which is relative, which is the same as this relative transform. So we'll right click on that little pin and split struct pin, so we can see the actual vector, rotation, and relative transform scale, and we'll plug in our vector into that. And the next thing I like to do is we're going to drag out of this return value and do set box extent. Now, I know you can click here and set it right there, but it makes me feel better to be able to see this checkbox right here to make sure that my update overlaps is actually checked. It is by default, I understand, but I just like seeing it. Either way, once we finish with that, we will be done with our construction script for now. And compile and save, and we go to our event graph. And so we don't need that one or that one. What we need is event actor overlap. Because what we're going to be doing is we want to, every time an actor overlaps one of those collision boxes we just put up, we want it, first of all, let's check if it's our NPC. So let's do cast to NPC base. And drag into there. But then we're going to want to make sure that this NPC base is actually the one following this particular path. In case we have multiple paths and they cross each other, we don't want the NPCs to be updated by an incorrect path. So let's go into our NPC base and add a few variables to them. So double click our NPC base, and we are going to add some variables here. Well, this needs to be our patrol path. We're going to expose that, and I'll show you why in a second. And on the variable type, we are going to look for patrol path as an object reference. That is going to allow us to select the patrol path that we want this guy to follow via this little actor selector from scene eyedropper thing. I'll show you in a second. But before we leave the NPC base, there's a couple of other variables we got to make. Maybe we want him to follow the patrol path backwards. So is he going backwards? And that needs to be a boolean. Just something we can check. We can also, I don't know. Do we want him to loop around when he gets to the end? Like go from the last point to the first point? And we might also need, in case we want him to just follow the path backwards, maybe we need to set a bounce back. We want him to get to the last point and sort of bounce backwards along the path again. And we'll see. We might not need all those, but let's see. Yeah, so we go back to patrol path. And now that our NPC base actually has a reference to this patrol path, we can say get patrol path. And we're going to check if this patrol path is us equals self. And that's gonna make sure that the patrol path this guy's following is in fact the one that we are, I guess, in this case. So we hold B and left click to drop a branch. And as I'm thinking about it, this is going to get a bit messy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually promote this NPC base. We'll call him guy on path. I'm going to promote him to a variable. That way I don't have to drag cables out of this cast node across this entire set of code. Because as I'm thinking about it, it's going to get a bit big. Alright, so the first thing we need to know is our guy going backwards on the path? So we'll get guy on path, and we will get backwards. And hold down the B key again, drop a branch, and plug it in. Now we will go from the true of this to that. If it's false, we don't want it to do anything, so it can just say blank. Now, we're going to need some information. So we are going to need our path. And we're going to need the last index on our path like we did before. Because we need to know if the next point on the path that the guy's supposed to go to is actually the last point. So get number of spline points. And minus it by 1 so we can get the last index. And actually, I forgot to put a variable in our NPC base that corresponds to the index of the next point he's going to. So we'll call it next point, and that's actually going to be a integer. And we can actually expose this so we can make him start halfway through the spline if we really want to. Back to our patrol path. We can grab our guy on path now, and we will drag out of it and get next point. So we want to know if next point equals the last index on the spline. So when he overlaps this, that means that he just arrived at his next point. But we want to find out, is this point the last point? If it is not, no big deal. We just get our guy on path, get next point, and then we set next point. And since he's not going backwards, we'll just add 1. So it'll be next point plus 1. Not exactly pretty. Let's see if I can maneuver these things so that they're not as messy looking. There we go. Close enough. That's really bothering me. There we go. All right, next. We said that he is not on the last spot here. But what if he is? All right, well, we need to find out what kind of behavior you want him to do from there. So let's say guy on path. Are you gonna bounce back? Get bounce back. Yeah, all right. And so hold B, left click, drop it on there. All right, if he is not going to bounce back, then we need to ask if he's gonna loop. Now, the reason I added both of these options, and I'm checking both of them anyway, is because you might want your guy to patrol only one time and then just stay there. So if you say that he's not looping, you don't have to do anything and he'll just stay there. Just don't update his next point, he'll just stand there. If you do want him to loop, then you have to do something. Since he just got to the last point, we need to set next point to 0, because that will make him cut straight through to point 0. And that's all you got to do for that. Oh, I'm sorry. That's if he is looping. If he's not looping, we want him to just sit there. Now, if he's going to go backwards, then there's a couple of things we want to do here. So we need to get guy on path, and we're going to set backwards to true. We're going to set backwards to true. And then we are also going to get guy on path, and we are going to set next point, and we're going to want to set next point to the last point on the spline, or to the last index on the spline, -1. Well, the last index on the spline is the last point -1, so if we get the last point and subtract 2, that'll give us the previous point. So get number of spline points -2, and that will actually give us negative, and this needs to be a 2. All right, now for the other side of our path, that is if we are in fact going backwards, I'm gonna do a little bit of a cheat here to save you guys some time. Feel free to skip ahead if you know what I'm doing, because all I'm doing is I'm going to copy paste this entire block and then modify it, because it's gonna pretty much be a repeat. Control C, and Control V. All right, now I did say it was going to be a repeat, but it's going to be a tiny bit different. So, all right, so if you're going backwards, we need to check if you just got to the very first point, which will always be 0. So we'll ask, and we will essentially ask if next point equals 0, which actually, it really bothers me when those are backwards, so I'm just going to fix it. This just connects straight into there, and fix that. All right. If you don't know how to do that, I just double click on any of these lines and it creates a reroute node. That's what I'm doing it. All right, next thing we need to do is if it is not equal to 0, that means you're not at the end of the line, which means that we need to just subtract 1. So we'll remove this add and we will do -1. This is all just going to be the opposite of what we did before, because we're going the opposite direction. If you are at the end though, we're going to check if you're going to bounce back. If you're going to bounce back, then we need to make sure that backwards is false so that you go forwards. And instead of sending you to this craziness, we will actually send you to 1. Because that's always going to be the next index from 0. On the other hand, if you're looping, we actually need to send you to the last index, not just 0. So we are going to get our path and get number of spline points, minus that by 1, and that gives us our last index, which we plug in here. And that will send you going backwards. That will send you through the loop, going backwards the other way. And that is it. And that is it. We are going to go ahead and go back to our top-down map, and we'll go ahead and drop our patrol path on the stage. Notice that we are getting our little boxes placed on there. One of them's missing. Oh, I forgot to connect the index to the point index. If you don't do that, you'll only get one box on the very first one. So if you notice that, like I just noticed it. Now make sure that when you're dragging this, you actually grab the number 1 index and pull it out and not the root, because otherwise your index numbers will be out of order and your patrol will be out of order. If you've never dealt with splines, you can hold Alt and drag any of these lines to add extra points. And that is all we're going to need for now from this. Next up, we have to go do the actual behavior so that we can use this. But before we go there, I did say that I was going to show you guys why we made a reference to the patrol path and exposed all those variables. So right here under default, if you have your NPC selected, you can grab this eyedropper and notice it won't let you pick anything except the spline points, which are really hard to grab from this far. So zoom in a bit and click it, and now it says patrol path. If it's blank, it won't have a reference, so it won't work. And just for kicks, we will have him bounce back and start at 0. So he'll have to run all the way here and then go across. All right, back to the behavior tree, which I just deleted what I had here and it did not like it apparently. In case you guys didn't know, I usually do this and then I delete all of it and do it again so that you guys can see me do it. So that way I can make sure that it works before I get you guys watching me and wasting your time. All right, so we're going to create a new service for our patrol. So we're going to go to New Service, click BT Service Base, and drag it over here. It always comes out with that weird name, so I always go right back to the content browser here and change it to something I'm going to remember, like Patrol Service in this case. Then we can go back to the Patrol Service and work on it. We're going to go to Functions, Overrideable Receive Tick AI, and then we're going to drag out of Controlled Pawn and cast to NPC base. And we are going to get Patrol Path, and then we're going to get his path from the Patrol Path, because what we want is a location, right? We want to send him somewhere. So we need the location on the spline points. So get location at spline point. Same sort of thing we did when we were in the construction script to put the boxes down. But it asks for an index. Well, guess what that index is? Get next. Oh, that's not from the Patrol Path. That's from this guy. Get next point. All right, and so next point, that'll give us a vector. We have to change this to world location because we're no longer looking for a relative transform. We're looking for an actual world location. Next, we need a key selector. So it's going to be called destination key. Don't forget to name these with the key that it associates with, so it's easier to keep track of. Then we're going to change this to a blackboard key selector. You're going to drag this into our map here, or graph, and set blackboard value as vector. And we're going to hook that up. And that is everything we need to do for that. Our service is complete. So we can go back to our behavior tree and we can right click right on this little sequence we made in the last video and do Patrol Service. And destination key, destination, and we can drag out of that and move to. So we want our guy to move to those places. And we need to set the blackboard key to destination on our move to. We don't want it to restart itself, but we do want it to observe the blackboard value so that as soon as it changes, our guy can, change his destination. And that should be everything we need right in here. So I will save, and let's go see if it works. Alright, let's click play. And looks like he's running all the way over there. And then he goes to the next one. And then he goes to the next one. Let's see if he'll bounce back properly. And there he goes backwards. And he should be running back all the way to 1. When he gets to 1, he should bounce back again. Alright guys, that is it for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have any questions or comments or want to see something specific, don't forget to put it down in the comments, and I will see you guys on the next one.